Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our first council meeting for 2019. It's great to see everyone here. We have a full council, I think. Yeah, everyone here, and it's great to see people in the public gallery. I want to commence by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet, the Butchela people, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Country for Aboriginal people means far beyond the dictionary definition of the term to culture, law, and specific places. So we have an ongoing relationship with the Butchela people, which I think is developing in a very positive manner. We're opening today's meeting with Pastor Ross Davey from the Bayside Christian Church. Thank you so much for coming here today.
Thanks very much, George, and it's a new year.
Thank you, Ross. We have no apologies. Everyone's here. Let's spend the next 10 minutes doing disclosure of interests. Are there any interests to disclose? Councillor Lewis.
Yes, thanks, Mr Mayor. I'll try not to exceed that 10 minutes and leave time for others. In relation to item 10.3.5, which is the expressions of interest for the Hervey Bay CBD precinct, I declare that I have, or possibly have, a perceived conflict of interest in the matter, in that my family trust, the Lewis Family Trust, and my wife Susan Ann Lewis own 25% each of the shares in a company, Lakeside Law Proprietary Limited, which company owns Unit 5 at 6 Liuzzi Street, Pyalba, which is within the boundary of the Master Plan's precinct area. By way of further very brief explanation, the precinct, the overall precinct area for the master plan is shown on page 300 of your agenda, and it does include Liuzzi Street, or it includes the eastern side of Liuzzi Street, that street in turn being on the western side of the lake opposite the university, so it's on the southwest fringe. I wasn't previously aware that Liuzzi Street or any part of it was included within the precinct. And in fact, if you look at the master plan, the precinct document itself, that breaks down 4 sub-precincts: special residential and commercial, civic and entertainment, green heart and cultural and educational. The Liuzzi Street area west, on the western side of the lake, isn't in any of them, and I'm not sure it gets a mention anywhere in the master plan. It's included in the overall space, but it doesn't seem to be taken into account. So in that sense, it's not particularly relevant to the issue. The unit we own, which is my old legal premises, is obviously already developed. It's not likely to be part of any new proposal, given that it's already built on. And obviously my position is different from the position of someone who perhaps would own half a hectare of vacant land in the precinct. Obviously any project, any major project, can impact on buildings and businesses, not just within the precinct, but for quite some radius around, both positively in the sense that major works may make the place more attractive and therefore attract more business, negatively in the sense that they may create competition for businesses and buildings already in existence. As I say, this subject property is really remote from the areas that are likely to be relevant to these expressions of interest. It's not likely to be impacted in any sense, in any material way, and in fact I preface my remarks by saying I possibly have a perceived conflict because in fact it's arguable that my interest is no greater than other persons in the local government area, given that this may or may not impact in some marginal way perhaps thousands of businesses and buildings within quite a radius of Pyalba. So the legislation requires the council, who obviously I appreciate will make a decision on this, and also, of course, the councillor declaring the interest, to take into account the nature of the interest versus the nature of the community benefit. I've got a real interest in this particular project because, firstly, it's in my division. Secondly, it will relate, in the overall sense, to issues such as cultural activities, which were part of my portfolio responsibilities when we had them, part of the round table I'm working on, and of course areas of particular interest to me. So I've concluded that my personal interest isn't of sufficient significance, especially taking into account the comparison with the community interest. I believe I can perform my duties notwithstanding any perceived conflict, and therefore, subject of course to council's decision, I propose to remain in the room and participate in the vote and the debate. Thank you.
A question. So the motion refers to undertaking an expression of interest process in the Harvey Bay CBD precinct, and then on page 300, the Harvey Bay CBD precinct is mapped in an area that includes the land you partially own.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, if you look at that map on page 300, you'll see a little area west of the lake there, and that's Liuzzi Street at the very edge of it. Those buildings are on the eastern side of Liuzzi Street. One of those buildings contains the unit that my family have a half interest in.
Yeah, I'd say, notwithstanding the unlikelihood that we'd ever build on that site, which is already built on and which doesn't have a footprint large enough for our use, there is a perceived conflict in us moving a motion that we want to look at undertaking a development in an area that you have a partial interest in. It's more perceived, I think, than real, but I would move that the councillor does have either a real or perceived conflict. And I've got to do the second one. The councillor Lewis has a perceived conflict of real or perceived. Real or perceived conflict of interest in relation to agenda item 10.3.5. Is there? And we'll move that one first. Is there a seconder for that? If there's no, okay, there's a seconder. Councillor Light, do we speak to this, or we'll just go straight to? You
can speak.
Yeah. Or does anyone? Obviously, this is a somewhat of a grey one, but on one view. Is there any speakers for or against? If not, I'll put the motion that Councillor David Lewis has a real or perceived conflict of interest in relation to agenda item 10.3.5. All in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All against? 2, and 1 obviously not voting. So that's carried. No, now there's a follow-up one. I've either got to move that he must leave or may participate.
So I'd like to move that he can remain in the room and participate in the vote.
Okay, is there a seconder for that? Yeah. So the Councillor Truscott, seconded by Councillor Everard, has moved. Taylor and Everard.
It's the beard, isn't it?
Yeah. Has moved that Councillor Lewis may participate and discuss on vote on agenda item 10.3.5, notwithstanding that there is a real or perceived conflict of interest. Are there any speakers? All those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All opposed? 1. That's carried 9-1. Are there any further declarations of interest?
Mr Mayor, for the sake of the new legislation and sake for total transparency, and this is far-fetched, but regarding 10.3.5 and some distance away from a business that I have a franchise with, Australia Post Corporation, obviously if this was developed there could be a flow-on benefit. I think it's only a perceived conflict of interest that for the meeting.
I'll move. Any property that you own is well and truly outside of that mapped area on page.
And I lease it,
Yeah,
but the actual
yeah.
business. One
So
could argue that I'd have a benefit in that business if it was developed as a CBD. It is a very long string to the bow, considering of the new legislation.
Yeah, so the
Rather
interest, yeah, but the interest you have in land is a kilometre outside of that red boundary.
Correct.
Yep.
Correct.
I'll move that Councillor Light does not have either a real or perceived conflict of interest in the matter and is accordingly free to vote and free to participate in the meeting while agenda 10.3.5 is discussed, including by voting on the matter. Seconded by Councillor Sanderson. Any discussion?
Point of order,
Yep.
Mr. Mayor. Look, I just raised this, that I won't be voting on this resolution because the legislation's quite clear that anyone else who has a conflict or has declared some potential interest shouldn't be voting for those who have a potential interest in that subject matter. It follows, not that I'm going to take any point, it follows that Councillor Light shouldn't have voted on mine either. I just point that out, not to be helpful, not to be critical, because we are a bit overwhelmed with these new rules. But if anybody else is about to raise the fact that they have a potential or perceived conflict in relation to this item, then perhaps that should be done now, so that we can make sure that all of those who aren't eligible to vote don't vote.
Can I suggest, in order to, because that is legislated, no, we don't want Councillor Light to get into any trouble, that perhaps we could re-vote on that matter.
Or is it
If
just
it's-
a matter of him withdrawing his vote? Or I'm happy.
Okay, so
Yeah,
can I withdraw that vote?
because it is legislated.
Yeah, for the record, I will go back and re-vote on the prior motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried 8-1 with 2 not voting. All right, back to this one. Is that right, Marlene? Yep. So this is,
You're not being.
there was a point of order. Councillor Lewis had a point of order before we voted on it.
Yeah, right.
Sorry? Yeah.
Yeah, no, sorry, I was.
Okay, so we'll now vote on this, that Councillor Light does not have a real or perceived conflict on item 10.3.5 and can vote on the matter. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yep. I'll put the motion. All in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Carried unanimously with 2 not voting. Are there any further disclosures of interest? And in future, what we'll do is we'll take all the disclosures of interest before voting on any of them, so that that doesn't happen again.
Mr Mayor, my apologies for doing that. The new legislation is rather complex.
Yeah,
I'd like
that's
to
not, yeah.
thank
that's
Councillor Lewis.
That's an unusual
Sorry about
sort
that.
of effect on that it impacts upon the order on which we go through it, yeah.
Sorry.
Yes? Councillor Truscott.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just checking. I think there's the vote number missing on the one that Councillor Lewis has a real or perceived conflict of interest. It says carried, but I think that was.
In the end, it was
Was
8-1.
it?
Oh, real or oh no,
It was 9.
he has a real interest.
But there was
No, that he actually has that he has a conflict of interest.
It would be
there was 2 against that though.
that was 8-2.
We should revote that one too.
But because.
We have to revote that one
Yeah,
too.
but because,
Yeah.
I've seconded it and then can't vote, would that not excluding from that original resolution?
Yeah,
Mr.
yeah.
Mayor, in the abundance of caution, can we
Yeah, yeah.
start this process again,
Yeah.
including the vote for both
Okay,
these matters?
can we wind the clock back 10 minutes? I said it would only take 10 minutes on this, but we're going to take 20.
So with the original
Yeah, I know.
resolution, Seymour and Light,
Yeah,
if Rolf's excluded from.
yeah,
the
we're going to
next
have to,
one,
we're going to have to do that one again. That couldn't have taken place. He couldn't second that.
Yeah.
I'll move that council as in item to 10.3.5. Is there? That's seconded by Councillor Taylor. All in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All opposed? 1, 2. That's carried 7-2, with 2 not voting. Sorry about this, Marlene.
We'll go slowly,
Yeah.
that's right, because it can't say abstain.
Yeah, it's not voting.
Sorry about that, I should.
Okay, that's right now. And now Councillor Taylor is moving and Councillor Everett is seconding that Councillor Lewis may participate and vote on item 10.3.5. All in favour? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All opposed. That's carried 8 to 1, again with 2 not voting.
Why isn't it stated in there who's not voting?
Do you need to report that?
Yes.
Yeah, it should say that,
We'll take that on notice and reflect that in the minutes. These aren't the actual minutes, these are the minute notes. So we'll take that, we'll take that on notice to get advice on it.
This conflict one, it's really. I think it should be there before, just to make sure.
okay. Okay, thank you. Are there any further disclosures of interest? If,
Do we have to revote on?
no, we just did both of them again. If at any time later in the meeting you realize you do have an interest to disclose, say it right away. Just because you missed it now doesn't mean you can't say it later. Okay, the next item is item 4, mayoral minutes. There are no mayoral minutes. Item 5, confirmation of minutes of meeting, the last meeting in December. Is there a mover that they be accepted as true and correct? Okay, Councillor Hanson. Is there a seconder? Councillor Mattern. Does anyone wish to speak to the minutes?
Mr Mayor, just
Yep.
a question. I wasn't in attendance, so I don't vote on that. I still vote?
Yeah, apparently you do. Yep. I don't know how you make an informed decision on whether it's true and correct unless you're watching on the TV. Yeah, you can abstain on the basis that you have no knowledge of whether they're true and correct.
I've read the minutes.
Yeah, okay. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. The next item is public participation. CEO will give a brief verbal report.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We had 3 people attend public participation day. The first person was Michelle Kerr. She spoke on the Tinninbar Road and requested that this main access road to the Tinninbar community be included for road sealing. We also heard from Mr Graham Woad, who spoke on 3 flooding issues in the Maryborough region and the Australia Day Awards recognition ceremonies. And lastly, we heard from Mr Owen Cronin, who requested council assistance to establish a not-for-profit entity to allow for the deployment of immediate deployment modules. Sorry, allow for the development of immediate deployment modules.
Thank you. Councillor
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We've got a petition here from the residents of Damon Street and Polgol Street. Dear CEO and councillors, we, the undersigned residents and ratepayers of Fraser Coast Regional Council, are writing to request council to please consider the following requests relating to footpaths. 1, to construct a footpath along Damon Street from the existing footpath on Elizabeth Street that already connects to the Botanical Gardens to the Damon Park Lookout over the heritage-listed Fraser Island and Great Sandy Straits. 2, to extend the recently constructed Polgol Street footpath from the corner of Polgol and Damon Street further down to link with the existing Esplanade walkway that extends to Point Vernon. And there are 10 signatures with this petition.
Thank you. So the motion is that the petition be received and forwarded to the CEO for action. Is that correct? Seconded by Councillor Everard. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Are there any further petitions? If there are no further petitions, I'll move on. There's committee and delegates report. There's nil. Officers reports. Item 10.1.1 at page 46, the open resolutions register. Always questions about this. Are there any questions, Paul?
If you can read it.
No? Okay. If there... No. Okay. The recommendation is that the open resolutions register report be received and noted. Is there a mover? Moved to Councillor Hanson, seconded Councillor O'Keefe. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. The next item is 10.2.1, Council Ordinary Meeting Schedule and alternate venues for 2019. That's page 79. I assume Councillor Hanson wishes to move this,
Happy to move, Mr. Chair.
as we are doing a few. Two of them are in your division. Is T-Bar in your division? Or is that just on the wrong side of the border? Wrong side of the border. Okay. Yeah, seconded by Councillor Chapman. So are there any speakers about this schedule?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this is a great step forward. It certainly shows this council is a regional council, getting out there amongst the outlying areas, and I think the people of those communities will be very appreciable.
Outline the argument with suburbs.
Thank you. Any further? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Risk management policy, item 10.2.2 at page 82. The recommendation is that we approve the amended risk management policy as per attachment 1. Was there a mover for this motion? Councillor Madden, seconded Councillor Everard. Any questions or speakers? Councillor Taylor.
Just on page 85, when it talks about the responsibilities of the audit committee, through the chair to the CEO, can you just explain what it means by supporting councillors to discharge their responsibilities rather than supporting council?
Yeah, yeah, I don't like that.
I'm not sure how that actually, how that works in practical terms.
Okay, thank you. And I might refer to the director, but my understanding of that is providing advice to either individual councillors or the council, as opposed, if we said supporting council to discharge the responsibilities, there can be confusion. Is that relating to staff or staff and councillors? But this particularly relates to providing advice, information to individual councillors or the council as a whole.
Does that provide clarity?
No.
As much?
So when you look at, we're talking about the responsibilities under the Act. I mean, the LGAQ and the local government, Department of Local Government provide that, I guess, support. I'm again trying to understand when does the audit committee meet to assist councillors in discharging their responsibilities?
Okay. It's not that the audit committee specifically meets to provide advice to councillors, but they are available to provide advice to either to individual councillors or groups of councillors or the council as a whole. Now, I know that there are other forums and bodies for councillors to get that advice, and they might, and some of those specifically relate to legal advice, but it may be that the audit committee might provide advice in terms of governance that should be put in place. So it's very generic. Keith, did you want to add to that? Commissioner of the Chair.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. Through you, Mr. Chair. The Audit Committee also provides the overarching function of monitoring the approach to risk management in the organisation, and in itself providing that review process, that monitoring process, and those reports to the councillors provides that level of support.
And I guess it's a
assurance.
nuanced thing, but one is retrospective and the other is, I guess, proactive, or the concept of discharging. The word discharging causes me confusion as to what their role is in that process, and I guess I'm trying to get I'm genuinely trying to get clarity of if I'm receiving support in discharging my responsibilities, what, you know, that's a very specific term. It's not a general term. It's quite specific, and I'm trying to understand. I can understand that they review things and provide advice, which is different to discharging.
But my reading of that through you, Mr. Chair, is that they're supporting the councillors by providing independent assurances around council's risk processes or risk exposure in the organisation. So the independent assurance that the Audit Committee provides to councillors assists councillors in forming an opinion and, I guess, fulfilling their obligations as councillors. Their risk management responsibilities, principally.
I think Councillor Light, as the former chair, wants to add something.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know if what I'll say is going to maybe satisfy Councillor Taylor, because I can understand some of his concerns. and I think it's already been said by the director, but the fact is when I was the chair, and still this case where any councillor can go along to the audit meetings, and there would be nothing that stopping a councillor requesting information from the audit committee and seeking their advice from the audit committee if there was issues that they needed advice on, or a direction, not a direction, but advice on. So I can see that the audit committee is aiding and can aid councillors to discharge their duties in particular areas.
Okay, any further questions? If not, we have a motion moved by Councillor Mattern, seconded by Councillor Everard. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. The next item is item 10.2.3, councillor remuneration at page 89. There's the recommendation on page 89. Is there a mover for that? Councillor Mattern. Is there a seconder? Councillor Lewis. Any discussion? Yes. Yes, Councillor Taylor.
Through the chair, can we get a holistic view of how this process works, particularly in relation to the Independent Remuneration Tribunal, and how it comes before us today, to give us more clarity on that process?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and again I might talk generally and pass on to our resident expert Keith Parsons, Director of Organisational Services, if I've left anything out. So the tribunal has the responsibility for determining remuneration arrangements for mayors, deputy mayors and councillors. In setting the remuneration arrangements, the tribunal typically sends out a notice to all local authorities, asking them for advice on what changes, if any, should be made to the remuneration. Our council did not make a submission or recommendation to change the remuneration of councillors. The Remuneration Tribunal considers all the submissions that are presented to it and independently makes a determination as to what the increases should be for councils, and that's provided back to councillors for to consider.
Legislatively, is it required for us to pass this resolution? And if it hadn't been brought to us, what would be the mechanism that would flow on if we didn't actually bring it before a vote today?
Yeah, thanks. That's a very good question, Councillor Taylor. If the council did not consider this recommendation and made no determination, the remuneration increase would automatically apply. That's my understanding.
So for clarity, what we're doing is going above and beyond and being more transparent than, say, we're necessarily required to be. Is that fair to say?
That's exactly the case. There are a number of councils around Queensland who will be receiving, well, all councils around Queensland will be receiving an increase of 2.1%. Some, in the interest of transparency, will bring the matter to council and make a determination. Others will not bring it to council, but will still receive that remuneration increase.
Any further questions? Councillor Lewis.
This wasn't a question so much as a brief comment in favour of the motion. I just want to say this, that there's sometimes a temptation in some councils for councillors to oppose these sorts of increases in the belief that they're doing the community and the ratepayer a favour by reducing the salaries. I think it's important to consider the countervailing view, which is that by opposing increases, modest increases which are in effect keeping up with the CPI, and in our case, I think probably providing a salary which is in the range of, say, a junior school teacher. I think it's important that we do maintain some sort of parity if the independent tribunal so recommends, by being prepared to accept a modest increase roughly in line with the CPI, because that way we make it possible for people to serve in their capacity as councillors. If if council remunerations become totally unrealistically low, then you simply reduce the number of people, especially talented people, who are prepared to put themselves forward for service to the community in this way. And so while there's a temptation to think, well, if we suppress our salaries, we're doing the community a favour, in fact, you can be doing the community a disservice by depriving it of talent which it can use in the future. So I think it's not unreasonable to support this resolution.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. For some time it's been on the record some of my views on this, and the view is that in many other states the actual salaries of councillors are considerably low, and it's more of a payment for meetings or around that type of thing. And I'm not going to disagree with this motion, but I'm just putting it out for debate and thought. And to counterbalance comments from Councillor Lewis, is that in other states where it's not declared or not perceived by the community to be a full-time job, is that then you do have opportunities for professional people, solicitors and accountants and doctors and all different types of walks of life, to be able to give up their time and put their business skills, their knowledge, their education into the governance of that particular council. So it's a very interesting debate. There's counterbalance arguments on both, but where in New South Wales, which I'm used to many years ago, is salaries were a very small amount. My daughter-in-law went for Penrith Council in 2012, and from memory the salary is around $28,000 for a very large council. But those people that I met, the candidates and existing councillors, all had other full-time jobs. So it's an interesting debate you could have. The other issue too, I find that if it is a full-time job by pseudo of the salary in the state, where I have an issue is the different salary rates. If it's a full-time job, it's a full-time job. There's only so many hours in a week. So regardless of the size of the council, even though you might have bigger budgets and things like that, you still have the same level of impact on your decisions on the community. And I think that it needs to look at a broader sweep of salaries for councillors that need to have a smaller bandwidth. Thank you.
And that's right. Queensland is the only state in the country where it's a full-time job. That's not our decision. That's a decision of the state government going back perhaps 30 years. That Queensland would be the full-time, where local government's a full-time job. Other places, even if you're the Lord Mayor of Perth or the Lord Mayor of Darwin, I don't think it's a full-time. But that's a decision that's made at a far different level. Yeah. Any further speakers?
Yes.
Yeah, Councillor Taylor.
I will be voting for this resolution. I just make the note that this council did not make a submission on a pay increase. For obvious reasons, we believed in this room that it was an independent process. That process was conducted by a remuneration tribunal, which considers a range of matters, none of which was a submission from this council or councillors, and they determine the increase. The requirement is that it not be brought back to this. There's no requirement to bring it back for us to vote on it, but in this case we are and we can. And that legislation was changed while certainly I was serving as a councillor in the former, I think it was in 2012 it was changed. And it was changed because what tended to happen was a couple of councillors would vote against it so that they could be perceived to be the people who were in favour of no increase, and it was identified from the state government when reviewing legislation that it was creating conflict within councils, so they removed it and said let's make this independent, which they have. What I'm encouraged by is that this council has maturity to consider an independent tribunal's view on a matter and vote on it without the polity involved. So for that reason, I will be voting in favour of this resolution.
Are there any further speakers? If not, I'll put the motion. Move. All in favour? 1, 2, 3. All opposed? That's carried unanimously. The next item is item 10.2.4. the organizational performance report, pages 110 to 124. And the recommendation is that it be received. Are there any questions first? No? No? Is there a mover for that motion? Councillor Everard, seconded Councillor Truscott. Yeah. Did you wish to speak to this? No? No? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. This next one might not be as quick. Item 10.2.5, Maryborough Administration Building, pages 125 to 197. So you'll see the recommendation on page 125. Councillor Truscott, are you moving that? Yeah, is there a seconder?
Yeah.
Councillor seconded. Councillor Light? Are there any speakers or questions? Yeah, Councillor Truscott. Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I think this is an exciting opportunity, what we've got before us. While it's initially a challenge, it's been ongoing for a bit now that we're having to look at the demolition of the Maryborough Administration Building. I understand it was in here, it was built about 50 years ago, and I think it's for the best. Ultimately, the building is beyond repair, as we've seen from the reports. But I think we've got a great opportunity here to look at what we can do moving forward. I think we've got, I've had people approach me saying, oh, is this just an excuse to get Harvey Bay a bigger council office and to remove it from Maryborough? But from discussions in here and with the CEO and staff, I can say with certainty that that's not the case. And it's pleasing to see that we want to try and continue a presence in the Maryborough CBD and to build strongly on that. I think we've got an opportunity to look at things that we can do, looking at options of what are we going to do with the admin building, with the library. We've got an opportunity to look at perhaps we can, we're probably the best to do so in retaining heritage value in the Maryborough CBD. And I hope that with point 3 of the recommendation of investigations and development of location options for a new admin building in Maryborough, that we can look at existing sites in the CBD and potentially be able to activate those. And I think we're in a great position and, again, a great opportunity to do that. So I look forward to what we can do here to continue that presence and to stay strong in the CBD.
I'll just make something that's just occurred to me. This building's named the Domain Building. Billy Domain was the mayor when he was 80 years old. I turned 40 this year, so I can appreciate that's quite a big job for an 80-year-old. I think we should look at, if we're demolishing the building, we should look at some other way of, memorializing him. So I don't know if that needs to be a fourth part of the motion, that the CEO be delegated to investigate other ways to recognize William Domain. Are you happy for that to be an amendment?
I'm certainly happy for
Yeah.
that, yes.
Yep. Okay, thanks. Yep.
Just a question through the chair to the CEO. The report certainly speaks to points 1 and 2 of the officer's recommendation. There seems to be a disconnect between the actual content in the report and point 3, which is to find and look at locations. Can I get some background as to why why it's not simply a case of looking at rebuilding on that one location? Because I think if that's part of the actual recommendation, it probably needs to be explained more than what I can actually read in this report.
So, through the chair, thank you, Councillor Stewart, for that question. The primary objective of the report is to advise councillors of the condition of the building and the need to demolish that building. The council's not made a decision that it would immediately rebuild on that site, and it was the officer's view that until the council's because the council hasn't made a determination that it will build on that site, that we should look at potentially all options within the Maryborough CBD. Additionally to that, we have an issue with the library building, which requires around $400,000 worth of expenditure to fix the building up structurally. There may be options of incorporating the library building with the admin building. It may be options that we keep them separate and deal with them separately. But this was to allow myself and my officers to look at all possible options and present them to the council with the benefits and disadvantages of all options, with the primary objective of retaining a presence in the Maryborough CBD area. But there may be options that provide ancillary benefits, and I think Councillor Truscott alluded to the potential benefits of looking at building an alternative site, incorporating some of the existing buildings in the Maryborough CBD that have architectural heritage value, which, if not activated, may ultimately be lost to this community and future generations within our community. So it's about providing the broadest possible, providing back to council the broadest possible information and advice on where the building should be, so the council can make an informed decision as to whether it wants to rebuild on that site, or whether it actually has an interest in other sites and what those advantages and disadvantages might be.
I guess from my perspective is that there's two issues that you've raised there. I guess, and a couple of things that haven't, I guess, been raised in the report. But firstly is, if you are looking at options, location options as referred to in that limb of the recommendation, should it not go further to say what is going to happen to activate the space where the building is as well? Like, should that not be part of the report? And secondly, if what you've said is your intent or the desire of the officers, would it not be more prudent to remove the word locations and just have it as the development of options for the construction of the administration building, so it doesn't give the impression to me that we are looking at other options up without considering the option where it is currently in place, because that would obviously be my preference, to see it return to its current space. Pardon? Yeah. But see, that would be discussed in the report.
Through the chair, just in relation to the comments regarding amendment to item 3, to delete the words of location, so that it would read the Chief Executive commences investigation and development options for the construction of new administration building. I think it serves the same intent. I don't have a problem with it if the mover and seconder are happy to change that. In relation to a recommendation regarding what we do at the current site, well, I think that's probably premature until we look at the options, the development options, because it may be that the council resolves to rebuild on the current site. So the rehabilitation of the current site would be a recommendation around the rehabilitation of the current site would be a moot point if the council subsequently resolves to build on that site. As part of the demolition plan, we'll be bringing back something to council to get approval, because there will be a tender regarding the demolition, and we'll also put a program plan in place, and in terms, because it's a significantly high public profile site, we'll be advising councils during how we will present that site between the demolition and the reconstruction, or the potential alternate location.
So I want to, I guess, address what you've just raised, because you said that if there was another limb in relation to activation of that space, if it were not used, that it would be a moot point. I would suggest that that wouldn't be the case, because if you provide a report that said we want to relocate here, or we want to keep it in the same spot, then that in fact answers the question about how you're going to activate the spot, because you're going to put an administration building in there. But if you're going to come back to council and say, we want to move it up to Elena Street, or we want to move it to another location, as a councillor, I would want to have some idea of what that space is going to look like before I commit to another space. And that's, I guess, my intention, is that you can't remove something from one place without having, at the same time, some sort of higher order idea of what's going to replace it.
So it's my understanding that the council's made no determination about where the new admin building would go. So and you stated that if we're going to come back and say we want to move it here, firstly, we won't be saying we want to move it here. We'll be providing options to council for council to make that determination. But if the council were to move the location of the admin building to another site, we would at that time say, well, if that were to happen, this is what our recommendation would be with regards to the current site. At this point in time, there's been no decision by council to move the location of the admin building, and we're working on the basis that until we identify the development opportunities or development options to council, that we will proceed with the demolishment of the building, and hopefully we'll be bringing back to council in the very near future some options for council to consider. And if the council were to consider moving to another location, as part of that report, you're exactly right, we would have to indicate what we would be proposed, what options would be available to develop the current site.
And I guess that's my point, is I understand that, but if I was a member of the public reading this document, I wouldn't have any surety that that's the process that's being followed, because the recommendation stops short of, if it were to go to another location, the council would provide recommendations on how to activate the current spot. Other than the fact that you've just said it in a meeting where two people from the public can hear it, but if I'm reading this recommendation, I don't get that from it, and I didn't get that from it, and that's why I've asked the question today.
And probably as addressed by your suggestion that we remove the words "of location."
Okay. Or just location.
That we just say that the Chief Executive Officer commence investigations and development options for the construction of new administration building. And I think it takes away, hopefully takes away that concern.
Yep.
I do think, though, through the chair, that your point, Councillor Taylor, should be raised, that we are looking at, even with that site, that it will, either where we demolish, something will be done there. I think that's a good point.
Yes, Mr Mayor and councillors, I really think that this is a unique council, because we've got two cities, and to have we really need a presence in Maryborough CBD, and I think at the moment with the way it's set up with and our working staff not being in the CBD must be making it hard on the CBD businesses, but that's unfortunate this has happened. This is like driving a car down the road one day and then all of a sudden you find out the motor's no good in it. When we first took on council this term, we just thought that the air conditioning and a couple of things needed to be fixed in this building, and then when we really got into it and had a look behind, worse than the condition that it is, and it's just something that's a burden that's been put on. Another thing is, you don't know they're there until you find it, and then you've got a disaster and you've got to try and fix it. So I really think that this report that we've got in front of us here is given the CEO the opportunity to go out and study and have a look. I'm sure that it'll come back to the council, and the council will make the right decision where it's going to go. The location that it is, maybe it is the right location, it's right beside the town hall, but that's for the council to make the decision later on. But we really need to investigate the CBD and get that staff back in, and I think the sooner we do that and get this project moving in Maryborough, and it gives Maryborough CBD more stability. So I really think that we've got a lot of work to do in front of us with this building in Maryborough, and it's just been a burden that's been put on us, but I think that we've just got to work hard at it now and move forward, and this is a way of doing it. So I will be voting on this motion.
Councillor Lewis.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Could I just add to the comments of the Councillors Truscott and Chapman? Yes, I think, notwithstanding that it's a problem thrust upon us, it is a terrific opportunity. And I think it's an opportunity where we shouldn't squander the options to let our imaginations soar a bit. There'll be no end of possibilities for developing a really great building, either an administration building or an administration building with library or whatever. I don't think we should be looking at limiting our imaginations, because that way stagnation comes. The other aspect that I think is worth mentioning at this stage is that we should be encouraging the community of Maryborough in particular to exercise their minds and their imaginations, and let us have the benefit of their ideas of what they think would work well to make a real opportunity out of this particular issue. And organisations such as the Chamber of Commerce, Progress Associations and so on. I think I look forward to hearing what the Maryborough community thinks would be in their best interests as we take this opportunity to do what could be a pretty exciting redevelopment.
I just had a quick comment, and maybe might need to be taken on notice. The Keystone report refers to sort of heritage issues of it being in the vicinity of City Hall and the School of Arts, which were incidentally both the result of nationwide design competitions where architects from across the country, Robin Dodds for City Hall and John Granger for School of Arts, submitted and won. So perhaps that's something we could do, a design competition. But in terms of, it talks about the facades of them being in the area of this site. But actually, with the Domain building, it is now physically connected with the School of Arts building, which we own. A hole has been punched in the wall so that you can go from the second floor of one to the second floor of the other. I just want to find out, with the demolition quotes and investigations, has that been ascertained what impact you'll have on our School of Arts building, which will obviously you'll need that hole closed up. But in terms of, is it going to lean over if we take out one side? Is it a load-bearing building?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and that question's been asked at the executive level as well. So it was a freestanding building. My understanding, it was a freestanding building prior to the construction of the Domain building. The question was asked at the executive level, if we were to demolish the Maryborough Administration building, have we taken into account that connectivity between the two buildings and the impact on the School of Arts building? And the answer to that is yes, we have. As you said, we would have to close that hole, and we need to do that in a architecturally sympathetic way, so it's consistent with the architectural heritage of that building. But the quotation has incorporated and considered the impact that the demolition may have on that building, and we believe that there won't be any long-term impact.
Point of clarification there, I actually have looked at the two buildings, and between there is an air gap between the two buildings.
Yeah, except for where the connecting wall is on the second floor.
That's only the doorway.
Yeah, okay, it's just a tunnel. Okay.
Yeah, so it's just a tunnel, but the rest of it is two separate buildings. So when one building comes down, the other building will stand.
I just wanted to clarify, I don't think we'd officially, Councillor Light and I stated that we were accepting of the removal of the word of locations in point 3, so I'm certainly happy with that, and Councillor Light is happy with that as well. I just want in point 4 on the second line, Marlene, I think just the spelling of his name is, Demaine, I believe, for William Domain. And I just want to reiterate Councillor Lewis's words about, to not limit our imagination. I think that's wonderful, and look forward to what opportunities can be presented in this manner.
Any further speakers? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? It's carried unanimously. The next item, 10.2.6, Quarterly Progress Report on Implementation of the 2018 to 2023 Corporate Plan and 2018 to 2019 Operational Plan. Page 198. So the recommendation is that it be received. Is there a mover for that? Councillor Maddern, seconded by Councillor O'Keefe. Are there any questions or speakers? I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? It's carried unanimously. Item 10.3.1, Reef Council's Major Integrated Projects Proposal, page 217. There is a recommendation on page 217. Did you want to speak about this one, Sherrod?
Very briefly,
Yeah.
For you, Mr Mayor. So essentially...
Microphone.
You got to press it.
Sorry. Through you, Mr Mayor. So very briefly, the LGAQ has approached us and all of the reef councils seeking our support to, I suppose at this preliminary stage, endorse the proposal so that they can take that to market, to the federal and state government and try and access funding for a whole range of programs to support the further protection of the reef. There is some potential for co-contributions, and that could be projects that we're already involved in terms of our natural environment teams. It could be largely in kind though. It actually could be entirely in kind. So there's no specific resource request at this stage, but they're looking for our support so that, and all of the Reef Council support to get behind this proposal so they can try and ensure that we attract additional funds to support the reef.
Is there a mover for the motion? Councillor Everard, seconded Councillor O'Keefe. Yep.
You refer to in kind, and it talks about the financial contribution in the actual report. That it says there, local governments participating in the initiatives will contribute funding 30% to aspects that are customised and or delivered within their area. It's not usual that when we look at financial implications, we look at 30% of an unknown figure. Even if it is in kind, I'm trying to understand what sort of in-kind commitment and cost to council that would be 30% of.
So through you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Taylor. So the reality is the word customised, I suppose, is the key point there, is that we will work with them through the development of the program to put on the table projects that we're comfortable with. So in talking with my natural environment team, we'd be looking at things where we're already doing things in terms of water quality and try and package it up so that we essentially leverage additional funding to things that we already have built into our programs of works. So we wouldn't be looking at this stage to necessarily put additional projects on the table unless through future budgets council decides that that's a priority for us.
Yep. Any further questions or speakers? If not, I'll put the motion. Moved by Councillor Everard, seconded O'Keefe. All in favour? Any opposed? It's carried unanimously. The next item isn't as bad as it sounds. 10.3.2, revocation of assistance to sport and recreation organisations for capital projects policy, which I wish was renamed renaming or something. Or do you want to briefly talk about what it means?
So this is thank you, Mr Mayor. This is a procedural matter. The council has recently adopted a policy which, in essence, captures a lot of the elements that were part of the assistance to sport and recreation organisations for capital projects policy. So it's not appropriate to have two policies for the one matter. So the council's adopted the new policy, and we're seeking, as a matter of course and a matter of administrative process, to have this policy revoked.
Yep. Is there a mover for that motion on page 275? Councillor Maddern, seconded Councillor Everard. Any speakers? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? It's carried unanimously. Item 10.3.3, local heritage rates concession applications. That's page 288. And there was a proposed slight amendment to this.
Yeah, you wanted to move
Yeah.
to it.
Will I move it?
Yeah,
Or-
you can get
or
the motion amendment.
I'll wait till someone moves it and I'll suggest it as an amendment. Yeah. Is there a
I'll move that.
Yep. over page 288 to 289, and I would just, can I just suggest an amendment? Do we have that, Marlene? Basically, we've been running, we're the only council, at least we were when we started it in the state, to offer discounts for heritage-listed properties on their rates, recognizing that owning a heritage property, you're contributing in a public way, while it's a private property. You're contributing to the good of the community. It's a public good to have heritage buildings. So we offered, I think it's up to 10% discount on your rates, up maximum of $500 per property. And we just wanted to add look at adding another way of encouraging people to care for their heritage buildings and recognizing that by owning a heritage listed building, they are contributing to the public good. So Marlene will put that up there. So my proposal, which I'll ask the mover and seconder to consider, is, as you can see up there, request the CEO to develop a report and draft policy to provide greater incentives to owners of heritage buildings to encourage and assist them in preserving, maintaining, and enhancing the architectural character and heritage of their buildings. Can we change that to places? Because it may, oh no, buildings is fine, yeah.
So-
Yes?
So I just have a question.
Can I just ask first if the mover and seconder are happy to,
Let's go to the vote. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
I'm happy to have that.
and who was the seconder? Yeah, Councillor Lewis, yeah? You're happy? So, yeah? Okay, yes? Yeah.
Hang on, I need that thing shifted so I can see it. Thanks. So, can you just talk us through the methodology behind your point there? Like,
So we're requesting the CEO to develop a report?
Yep.
And draft policy?
yeah. So, if the owners are actively improving, preserving, then they're rewarded, but they have to be actively.
Yeah, I guess it's looking at different ways. This would be looking at, National Trust has put forward proposals. It'll be looking at different councils. I don't dare say its name, but Ipswich City Council does pretty good in this area. There would be some other areas, whether it's the borough in South Australia, a few inner Sydney councils. There are councils that have put forward different ideas that help to incentivize the preservation of character and heritage, and that assists owners with ensuring that their property is reflecting of its heritage, and when they're going at quite some expense to do stuff to the property which goes beyond their own personal and private benefit, goes to public. Councillor Chapman?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I'd actually, I support what you're saying here. I just think it's good to see, to put up a report, to look at an incentive for people to do their properties up, because this is part of tourism. People come here to look at our beautiful buildings, our beautiful heritage structures, and if we've got people taking care of them and knowing that the council recognise this, you'll see more and more, and it's a flow-on effect. One building gets tidied up and preserved, and then other people look at it and think, well, we'll do that to our place. I think it's a great opportunity and to put out an incentive to the community.
Councillor Lewis?
Yes, Mr Mayor, just for everyone's information, this is something that's been raised, and as the Mayor's indicated, there are perhaps a number of other options that Council can look at in terms of providing the incentives so that those providing a public service are compensated in some way. So I'm wholeheartedly for it.
And I just want to make one other point. It may be that while we offer a rates discount to people that are on the local heritage register, that's not the only means of sort of capturing heritage places. So, for example, in our planning scheme, we have character overlay that it should, the report could investigate that, because in the past and indeed in the present, we're a little loath to enter a personal. So if you look around Maryborough, most of the the Timber and Tin Queenslanders and the Victorian cottages, they're not on the register because they're a bit loath to put homes on the register. But they are sort of protected. There's down to the planning scheme, so it may be that we could offer incentives to people that are covered that aren't heritage listed, but are recognised in some way through the planning scheme. Yeah, Councillor Madden.
Just coming from a development sale background, it is a bit of a disincentive if you are looking to purchase a property and it's got a heritage restaurant, because it does limit what you are able to do. And I think it's terribly important, if we want to keep the level of values in our community at a higher level, that we don't have those disincentives. So this is an opportunity, I think, to ameliorate the disincentive but to keep the character of it. So I think it's important that we do understand that a heritage listing or a heritage overlay can be a disincentive to investment in our community.
Other speakers? Not, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. The next item, 10.3.4, Fraser Coast Agricultural Show Society sponsorship request, page 293. Yeah, Councillor Chapman's indicated he wishes to move the recommendation on page 293 over to 294, and Councillor Hanson seconded it. Did you wish to speak to this?
Yes, Mr Mayor and Councillors, I think that this support that we're giving to the Maryborough Show Society, it just shows that 140 years the show's been going. It says in here in the executive summary. They're a group of volunteers that really do a wonderful job out there every year. As soon as one show's finished, they're working on the next one. And with this money that we're putting into it, it'll try and grow the show. Numbers seem to be getting smaller and smaller at our shows, and one thing I wouldn't like to see is we lose them, because there's a lot of people out there love their animals and love showing them, taking them out there, and there's a lot of elderly people in our community. When I go to the show, just see them sitting in the grandstand and watching the show jumping and just thinking about their younger days and things like that. So I really think that this money will be well put to use, and it's great, and I will be supporting this, and great to see the council coming forward with this donation.
Councillor Hanson.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I concur with Councillor Chapman's comments. The Fraser Coast Show Society is one of the best organisations around, and they put on the biggest event annually, and this is going to go a long way towards helping them achieve their goals, and I support them 100%, as I know this council does.
Thank you. I just had one sort of related question. I think the show normally runs on a Thursday and Friday, is that right? And for, I think, at least a decade and more, we've made the public holiday on the Friday. Do we consult with the Show Society about that? Because people take it as a long weekend and they go away, whereas if it was on the Thursday, it might...
We tried that.
Oh, did you?
It didn't work.
Oh, okay. Oh, they had a 4-day weekend. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. So it's the state government that determines and gazettes public holidays in Queensland, and before making their determination, they seek the advice of council. We also, before responding, we seek the advice of the Show Society, and we typically relay the advice of the Show Society because they are best suited to determine what's in the best interest of the Show Society with respect to public holidays.
The Show Society wants the Friday, I take it.
Or the state government ignores.
Yeah, or is that...
Yes, they do, and I think we actually have asked that question about what about a Thursday, and people thought that, and I think the Show Society's view is, well, they get less people because people take an extra long weekend.
Yeah, just one other comment. The biggest challenge the Show Society has is to encourage or to get people from Hervey Bay to the event. And I'd just like to say publicly, I'd like to encourage people in Hervey Bay to go along and support this event. It is one of the best events in the region, and that group does a fantastic job. Maryborough and outlying areas have supported it very well for a very long time, but Hervey Bay seems to be a bit of a challenge. So people of Hervey Bay, go along to the show.
Yeah. All right, if there are no further speakers, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. The next item, item 10.3.5, expression of interest, Fraser Coast Regional Council Administration Centre, Hervey Bay CBD Precinct. This is page 296 to 308.
Mr Mayor, I'd like to move that the officer's recommendation with an additional third limb.
Okay. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I'll read out the additional point 3, which effectively says expressions of interest that include options where council lease an administrative centre building will not be considered.
Is there, and Councillor Everard, you're happy to second that? Okay. Did you wish to speak to it, or are there any questions first?
Good with that.
Councillor Taylor.
I think it's really positive that both discussions or decisions around our council buildings, both in Maryborough and Hervey Bay, are dealt with in the same agenda. There's no question that activating your CBD with, I guess, one of the biggest employers of the region is essential for the CBD growth, and I think this is a positive step forward. From a governance perspective and stewardship from behalf of an elected member, I think it's important that that third limb is added into that to say that we will effectively own our own space rather than leasing it, which has an impact on council's bottom line. And so I think the three limbs together provide certainty as to what we're looking for, and certainly paints a really good picture of what the CBD will look like into the future.
Councillor Chapman.
Yes, councillors and Mr Mayor, I will be supporting this. What I'm saying here is, this building here, we moved from Bedford Street to Tavistock Street. Now, we've looked at a layout of how we can make this building work more efficiently, and it's virtually, I feel it's impossible. Well, this building has seen its use by date for the size of the number of staff that it's got in it, and so we've just been lumbered with two administration buildings in the same year or virtually the same time. But it's part of life, and that's what we've got to do, is we've got to move forward. And I think with moving this our administration building into the CBD or into the Pyolba area, where it's been brought up within different reports and over the years, not just from the council, from independent people outside that have looked. It's going to move a number of like 300 to 400 people into the area of the Pyolba, and the thing with we've got a parcel of land here. We can always use this land to put towards a new building. But it's just something that's happened, and I will be supportive. I think it's we must make this move, and the sooner we do it, the better this council will function.
Thank you. Yep. Any further speakers? Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just probably a brief comment and statement, though. I agree with Councillor Chapman and fellow colleagues. Just to reflect on where we came from. First raising this idea many years ago about Hervey Bay having a CBD and never having one. To see this step being taken by the council and the administration, I just wanted to commend council for their future vision. This is a historic probably day and a legacy that we'll see in future generations, that Hervey Bay has never ever had a CBD. So to see this actually taking steps towards that and looking at options is a huge step. So just wanted to reflect but say that it's a tremendous day today that we've actually made this step forward and we're seeing this become a reality.
Any further speakers? If not, I'll put the motion. Moved Councillor Taylor, seconded Councillor Everard. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. The next item is item 10.3.6, Parks, Infrastructure and Enhancement Plans for Council Adoption, page 309. Councillor Everard's moving the recommendation on page 309. Councillor Chapman seconding it. Do you wish to speak to it? Wish to speak to this one?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I just think it's good that council's looking at these parks and how we can actually work on putting things into our budget and move forward. I know that all this money won't be spent exactly at the same time, but it'll go into a budget, into a system, and then we can move forward and work on a process there to But at least we've got an idea now of what can happen in these parks. And when someone wants to do something in them, we've got a plan. We can show them what's happening in the plan, and we're doing things once. We're not trying to do them twice. And I think it'll be more efficient and save money in the long run. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll speak to this. I think it's really good that we're doing these plans for parks right across the community. I think we need to find some way of getting more submissions. For some of it to have no submissions for the Mungar Park, 2 submissions for the park which occupies such a large area of Howard, and only 3 submissions for Augustus Park when it is the village green of that community. I think perhaps in future maybe we need to look at how we can encourage, because when you only got 0 submissions from Mungar, and when you only got two for most of these, so yeah, so out of 5, 1 got 3 submissions, 1 got 0, and the other 3 got 2 submissions each. And then we're weighing up those submissions, you know, like, it's very easy for our view on what the public sentiment is to be wildly out of kilter. So I think maybe we need to look at how, whether it's a better letterbox drop and an open day in the park, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Mr Mayor, thank you for that. I totally agree, and I think it goes to the way that we currently engage with the community, and I don't think it's as effective as it could be. We're currently working on a revised communication strategy that works on the principles of deliberative democracy. It's my view that when we engage with things, significant issues such as parks like this, that before we get a consultant to come up with a concept and then go out and ask the community what they think, we should be engaging the community from the get-go and asking and getting them involved in the design and having input as to what infrastructure they want to have in their community parks. That's the way that I think we'll be recommending to council that we move forward, rather than engaging a consultant and seeking through public notices or whatever council to community to comment on the plans that we've already developed.
Mr Mayor, I have spoken about this, but when we're talking about submissions here, one thing that come to my mind when I read this, and I never realised it, was these off-dog leash areas. And I've actually spoken to residents afterwards, and they're saying that there's been a number of attacks on people taking bigger dogs into these dog off-leash areas and letting them go without control on them, and they're attacking the little dogs. So that's something I'd just like to take up further with their officers on. Maybe we need to fence an area or fence half of it off or do something. So these attacks, people are not taking their dogs there because their little dogs are getting mauled.
I've seen that in Brisbane. You have little dog parks and next to a big dog park. So I've always found that little dogs are the more aggressive ones. Yeah.
It's strange to know how you'd measure a little dog compared, like, do you have to be able to fit them through a hole, or, I mean, yeah, it's, because my definition of it, yeah, and a little staffy could cause harm.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Chairman. I agree with the comment about needing to get the public involved more. It's very disappointing that Mungar, which is in my division, and Howard, which is in my division, only had 0 and 2 submission together. And I would almost guarantee that there are things that the public would want to see that didn't make the cut. It's a shame. Yeah, we need to do, I don't know how we do it, maybe letterbox drop out there in places like that, because there aren't many, particularly in Mungar, there's not many organisations that you can actually go to, apart from the school. But I think a letterbox drop would be good in places like that, because we need to gauge the community and what they really want in those areas.
Just my experience has been, say, particularly with Tyro, with Memorial Park, is that if we rock up there at some point in time and propose to implement this plan without effectively engaging with the community, we might find ourselves in a bit of bother. So whilst the council is adopting it today as the master plan, and it's the general vision for these parks, I would expect, my expectation would be, particularly with the parks that there's been little feedback received, that we undertake some level of consultation to make sure that we don't put a swing or a merry-go-round and then suddenly find that we've got 100 petitioners complaining that that's not the sort of infrastructure they want to have in place. So we will be looking at engaging prior to doing any works in those areas.
Through you, Mr Mayor, acknowledge all those comments. I just wanted to make comment on the dog off leash areas, that the actual rules around that is that a dog should not be in a dog off leash area unless it's a socialised dog. So the owner still retains responsibility. They should not be taking a dog into a fenced off leash area if they don't have effective voice control over their dog, and that it isn't socialised to be in that area with other animals. I acknowledge that doesn't mean that everybody does that, but the rules are in place, so it's important that we have good signage and good enforcement. But those dog off-leash parks are built for socialised animals that are trained and under effective voice control.
Councillor Mattern?
Okay. Just in terms of consultation around parks, and the CEO referred to Tyro, but there was also Wuku Park in Tanana, and I made a point of actually letterbox dropping that area myself to make sure that those that are in close proximity at least had some capacity to comment on the proposed plan. And I do believe there were probably maybe a couple submissions. So even doing that doesn't necessarily get you the effective response that you look for, but it did help. I mean, Tyro's a bit of a different kettle of fish.
Right. Any further speakers? Not, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. The next item is, and if I miss anything, let me know. As far as I can see, the next item is 11.1, Greener Fraser Coast, page 320. This has been placed on the agenda by Councillor Truscott. Was there any amendment to what's on the agenda? And are you incorporating that into it? Are you amending what you're moving? Oh.
That's not it. That's not it. That's not what you're moving. That's the officer's recommendation. You're moving an amendment to the officer's recommendation. Oh, actually, no, you're moving this. Yeah, you're moving this, which is going to be posted right now. There we go. That's what you're moving.
The provision of free trees. And Councillor Chapman, did you indicate you wanted to second this? Is that right? Yeah. Yeah. Did you wish to speak to it?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, happy to move this. It's something that have been wanting to pursue for some time now, and in speaking with members of the public, it was said to me that we're playing catch up with other areas, like when you drive into places at Noosa or Sunny Coast and Brisbane and Toowoomba, and you drive in and see these beautiful places. And I thought, well, whether it's catch up or not, this is the situation we're in now. We've inherited this, and we can only leave it better than what we found it, is the goal. And I think we have an opportunity here to show some vision and foresight that we can actually achieve a better outcome by making our streets and region more visually appealing, to reduce temperatures, to reduce our carbon footprint on the region, and to create calming effects and just make it a more beautiful and better place. And we can do that by something as simple as planting trees. I think this is a great opportunity. When I first raised this a year ago, I mentioned that some of my favourite spots while driving is on the Esplanade, just near Wetside, when you go through that tunnel of trees there, just near the roundabout, and just how it encloses you there, and in Elizabeth Street in Maryborough as being just a street as an example of beautifully tree-lined, where someone had that vision decades ago and made it such a better place. And I think we've got an opportunity to do that. Also, with this motion, it's setting a goal which, while I think is ambitious, I think it may potentially not even be ambitious enough in hearing of the tree planting efforts that are happening, I think, tomorrow. I think 100,000 trees is a great goal to start with. And I think hopefully that we may be able to build on that. And I think it's, I look forward to, should this come into effect, if this passes and we can get a report back detailing what can happen, I think there's a great opportunity here for the region.
Any further speakers? Councillor Chapman?
Yeah, Mr Mayor and councillors, I've been approached by people in the community and saying to me that they've got properties in down in Ipswich, and when they pay their rates, they actually get a voucher to say that they can plant trees. Why don't we do that here to try and encourage people to trees? So this will be something that will be in the report. I hope that it'll come back to the councils and we can make our decision there. But it's also, this is not the first. There's other councils out there doing this to try and encourage more tree planting. And I'd just like to say that there has to be guidelines on where you can plant street trees, because we've got to be very careful of our infrastructure and roads and footpaths, sewage, water. So we've got to be careful what trees we actually plant on the footpaths and places like this. And this report, I hope, will state what conditions and where things can be planted, because we don't want to see people plant trees on footpaths and then we've got to go through 5 years later, 10 years later and cut them down, so they won't be very happy about that. But if there's conditions, and I think this report will bring that out. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lewis?
Yes, thanks, Mr Mayor. I see this resolution, and I'm grateful to Councillor Trusk for bringing it forward. I see this as part of a suite of measures which we've been talking about for 12 months or so now. There are other resolutions on the Open Resolutions Register which deal with this same sort of issue, and I think it's important that we refocus, and this resolution helps us to do that, on the value of these sorts of street plantings. And while the resolution as amended goes a bit beyond street trees, nonetheless an important part of the focus is going to be street planting. As has been pointed out, it has a major impact on the microclimate. The cool streets, it's well established, are significantly cooler in terms of temperature than streets which lack that sort of vegetation. It's interesting to go to meetings in streets and see that the shady parks are the ones that are first occupied. For all sorts of reasons, shade is important, and it's going to get more and more important. In addition to that, we know that there have been studies which have indicated the psychological benefits of these sorts of plantings. One of the other aspects which perhaps we don't think of quite as often is the economic impact. The leafy suburbs of Brisbane is a sort of a cliche which has been used for a long time. But if you think about it, and if you've lived in Brisbane, you understand that the leafy suburbs are the ones that are perhaps the wealthiest, and they're wealthy because they're desirable. The same applies, and in Hervey Bay in particular, I see a problem that too many of our more recent subdivisions have overlooked the issue of street trees, and there's a lot of ground to be made up to ensure that they can be at some stage referred to as the leafy suburbs. It's the desirability of that kind of development of a shady, a leafy, a vegetated development. It's the desirability of that which will assist us to attract workers to the industries which we are trying to attract to the area. If we want to attract our doctors and our professionals and so on, they are going to want to live in attractive places. They're not going to want to live in the proverbial the concrete jungle or whatever. So we need to bear in mind the economic impact as well as all the other impacts, and I guess we need to inculcate in the minds of ourselves, the community and the development industry, that catering for trees is just as important as catering for other infrastructure. And when we get it into our mindsets that it's not an optional extra and it's not the first thing which we discard if we're trying to maximise yield, then we'll start to make some progress in the area. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Aberard?
Pick me. I just have a question. Look, lovely philosophical words, Councillor Lewis. I'm
You're going to finish there?
no. But I guess a comment and a question to the CEO. As an elected member of council, I quite often get residents ask me about removal of street trees that are on the nature strips that the residents care for. What about supportive of trees being planted on their nature strips? How will that be covered in the report is question one. As Councillor Chapman, we have to be mindful of the future costs to council around infrastructure, right trees and right locations. Would it be possible to include in this report a section on the identification of some places or some locations across the region where we can strategically plant trees? Would that be an option to go in there?
So I'll answer your second question first because it's the easiest one to answer, and they're captured in item 2.
Yeah, street.
Okay. So
I'll give you an example. Someone comes along and they want to plant a tree on my nature strip. I don't want a tree on my nature strip. What happens then?
So in relation to street tree planting on nature strips, that's a great question. I'm going to ask the Director of Development and Community to respond to that.
No, look, it's a legitimate question. Blocks of land are getting smaller. Kids like to play on the front lawn. You can't have a game of cricket with a tree in the front because you can't mow that pitch on the nature strip. Just putting it out there.
Through you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Deputy Mayor, for your question. So I'm envisaging that the report that comes back will be all-encompassing and explore all of those issues. The reality is as Councillor Lewis alluded to, I think it really is for new subdivisions a design issue, and the reality is that out of a total cost, it might cost the developer $50,000-$60,000 to put a lot on the ground, and the street trees $500 to $800 of that. And rightly or wrongly, the conscious decision's been made over the last decade, allowing that to. But there's a whole range of design outcomes that we can look at, particularly for new subdivisions. We can look at clumping planting, so it doesn't necessarily have to be one street tree in front of every house. You can look at areas in terms of your design and how you do that to still leave some of those areas vacant that you're talking about. In terms of retrofitting, I don't think it's going to be a one-size-fits-all. I think, in my limited time here in the couple of months that I've been here, I think there's some areas that really you can just look at and you can see that they could create beautiful avenue plantings on some of the higher profile roads. We'll obviously have to discuss some of that with the Department of Main Roads and get their approval. We'll obviously have to work closely with our engineering colleagues, but the reality is, I'm sure most of you have all walked the streets of a city like Melbourne, and there are trees amongst all of the concrete everywhere. If you walk through the streets of Manhattan in New York, they're some of the most beautiful tree-lined streets in the world, and they're building to building concrete and bitumen. So they were all planted in much more challenging environments than we have right now. The reality is you can prepare the planting bed very well. There's good science around it. You can put good tree barriers, good root guards in place. So we can take a really scientific approach, make sure that it's not one size fits all, that we put the right trees in the right locations, and that we, as you mentioned, that we engage residents in it. The reality is there are going to be some streets where we, do some of the engagement we were talking about previously, and we might knock on everyone's door and find that everyone, wants a tree out the front and they're happy to work with us and water them and help us grow them in. And then we may find other places where we hit some resistance. And as I said, the report will be all-encompassing, but my thoughts would be that we should start by working with the people who want to work with us and who share the aim that the motion is trying to get through. And you wouldn't want to get into an environment, and I've seen it in you know, many places where you're chasing your tail in the sense of we're putting in trees and then people are deliberately destroying them or removing them or the like. You know, there will be sections of the community who really want it and are on board with it, and I think that's probably where we start in terms of the street tree planting.
Yep.
What about the other question?
Was
strategic planning, like the identification of locations that we could do some master planning, strategic planning. Yeah.
So point 2 relates to street trees, and thanks for pointing that out. But as Jared said, I think the report, the intention of the resolution or the motion that's been put forward by Councillor Truscott, and if I can confirm the advice from the director, is that we're looking for an all-encompassing strategy that incorporates all those issues.
Okay. Any further speakers or questions? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. There's no question on notice reports coming back. No consideration of items placed on the agenda by myself. So we're in general business. Is there any matters of general business? Councillor Taylor.
I have a question. And I haven't pre-warned him, but I'm sure you'll take it on notice. And it is to help or assist me in progressing my deliberations around the budget. So that's why I make this. This is not a financial question, though. It's simply an objective question. In relation to the Pialba Youth Precinct, is there space between the Pialba Youth Precinct skate park and the Pialba Adventure Playground to construct any beach volleyball courts? Or is there space close to this precinct that would be suitable for beach volleyball courts? And you may want to take that on notice.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Taylor, and I will take that on notice.
Thank you. Councillor Light.
Oh, thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a quick statement on a positive note over the Christmas period. Yes, I have a business that see a lot of tourists and in that precinct at Torquay. But can I just say the amount of tourists that were out and about, people on holiday from all around Australia and all around the world, was very encouraging, and particularly the amount of people that expressed their desire to move here. And the number of people that are moving here, especially in January, new arrivals, it's quite staggering. We should be proud of the region. It looked fantastic over that period of time, and it was very encouraging. And certainly some businesses that were publicised in the paper, one was an ice creamery, doing extremely well. I can say the crowds were down the street and around the corner around those businesses. It was just staggering. So I think it's a great encouraging sign for the region and economy. And look, I will make a comment regarding there is a hot rod show coming up which the Deputy Mayor's aware of. And I won't disclose the exact other council, but the organisers have mentioned to me that we're streets ahead, excuse the pun, above another council, and only because of the excellent approach by our staff and our senior executives was to secure that show for Maryborough. So I've passed that on before to the CEO. It was great to hear. They could not speak highly enough of it, and that's a show of over 10,000 people per day visiting the event over Easter. It's quite a significant show. Probably we'll never see it again. Well, we'll see it maybe in another lifetime because it does the rounds around New South Wales. Around Australia. So anyway, congratulations to the staff on that. Really good comments.
Councillor Truscott.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just wanted to take this opportunity to thank the Fraser Coast Council staff and anyone that, I think Councillor Chapman, yourself as well, and myself have been regular blood donors and plasma, and they asked if I could present this or show this here. I think we're doing an official presentation tomorrow. But so for 2018, the Fraser Coast Council staff and everyone involved donated 149 times, which is saving over 447 lives. So I think that's a pretty good effort to thank the staff. And and so they've set our goal at 200 for this year. So come on, Darren, you've got to get back. But so we've got some competition with like Bunnings and I think the fire service and a few others out there. And so we've got 7 already for this year. So I think well done to the staff and can only encourage them to continue doing that.
Yeah, good stuff. Yeah. Any further? Councillor Hanson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say a few words, take a bit of a moment in support for our primary producers, not only our primary producers in this region, but in Queensland and Australia. As the councillor held the portfolio for 6 years, and as part of a council who I know is very supportive of primary production, I want to publicly condemn a group of people who are out there trying to name and shame farmers who are making a living. This is nothing short of online bullying, and it is pretty bad. As a community leader, I think I need to make a stand on this, and I know other community leaders are as well. The name of the group is Aussie Farms, and the title is very misleading. They're a group of activists who are actively trying to shut down primary production in this country. And I know I was talking to Lou O'Brien this morning. He's going to make a statement about it as well. And I feel that it's an attack. And what they've done, they've actually listed all of our private details on a website, on their Facebook site in Australia. They have 21,000 members, and they've listed in my farm and a lot of other farms as well. They've listed our phone numbers, a direct, very precise map to get to our farms, and the only reason they would do that is to disrupt our livelihoods and they're not only our farms, they're also our homes as well. So I think it's a terrible thing, and as a community leader, I condemn that action. I don't condemn what people eat and that sort of thing, but I condemn those sort of actions. I think they're nothing short of almost domestic terrorism in a lot of ways. So I just want to put it out there.
Thank you. Any further items of general business? If not, I think that concludes the open section of, unless somebody corrects me, that concludes the open section of our agenda. So under section 2751C, matters referring to local government, 275E, contracts proposed to be made by it, and 275H, business for which a public discussion will be likely to prejudice the interests of the local government or someone else. I move that we go into confidential. All those in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Yep. Yeah. Does anyone want to take a quick comfort break? Yeah.